All right. Hello, folks. As you're joining, please go ahead and share video. Hi, Lars. Don't have audio from you yet.
Yeah, sorry. I'm
There you are.
trying to hunt for the unmute button. It's been a long weekend. I'm not sure I can stay on for the entire thing, Robert, because it's a public holiday tonight, today and tonight. So I'll see how far I can make it.
I realize you're like right on the tail end of a flight, I think. So I do appreciate the time that you are able to spend with us.
Yeah, that we actually canceled, but it's still a public holiday, and we just came back today from another trip inside of Finland, and my week is totally filled up by IGF stuff, which has also started today. So I'm trying to make some time for the other people in the house.
So we do have a pretty tight schedule. I want to get started pretty soon, but I'd like to see, was hoping we'd have Jay, and it would also be good if we could have Russ before we get started. But if they're not here in the next couple of minutes, I think we'll just move on ahead. So Greg, Maddie, Michael, Rich, and Alexi, please do go ahead and share video. The point of holding this meeting this way is so that we are simulating being around a table at an IETF meeting. It would be good to see each other's faces as we're talking about things. I was also hoping to have more community, just not usual tools team participants here. Michael, I'm glad that you were able to join us. Advertising this just to the tools discuss list might not have been casting the net wide enough to get people to spread information, but we'll go with who we have here. Thanks everyone for spending some time. The point of today's conversation is to give a brief overview of what we're doing to process email right now and talk about some of the changes that we're proposing to make and try to gather more information on what we need to do and when we can do some of these things to pull off what we're hoping to achieve. I'd like everybody to be basically co-browsing the notes page. Everybody's got that up, I hope. If anybody doesn't know where it is, let me know, and I will just shove this into the Jabber room so that anybody that arrives later also knows how to get to it. So my plan is to spend a little bit of time walking through this flow chart that describes the way we're processing mail now, then spend some time talking about the proposal that Jay has made for replacing the way people manage their IETF, their IETFA hosted list memberships. that's going to lead us into a discussion about minimum 3, which I think is going to eat a large bit of time. Sorry. And then we have some details to go through that will be follow on from Mailman 3 that you can see in the agenda. I'm expecting to have the conversation around moderating a given participant to take a little bit of time as we get into this. Does anybody think that we should be achieving something else than going through these things in this conversation? And for those of you that need to leave early, is there any reordering that you want to inflict before we get started?
I do have a question. Is this mostly, I mean, is it going to be mostly like the first part, presenting this is what's going on and this is what we're planning on doing? Or are you looking for more, I mean, I know you're looking for feedback, but I'm just, how set are these plans?
How set are these what?
Plans.
The point is to have a conversation about the plans. So this should be discussion, and we should be forming things as we go. So this session is being recorded. It's a media co-session. We will make the link available to people later. So keep that in mind as we're having the conversation. So let's go ahead and jump in. I have been getting some interruptions from people looking for the links at how to get here. So apologies for me starting as we're going through this. There is a link at the bottom of the IETF mail processing graphic that will let you pull up a full resolution version of it. Feel free to follow that if the small resolution version that's in the main link. Hang on, I need to paste a MediaCo link to some people that can't find it. So the way that mail gets processed is when mail arrives at IETF-A, the first thing that it does is it goes into postfix, and postfix throws it through some checks to make sure that it's coming through places that it should come through, then runs it through a virus scanner as described later in the document, runs it through Spam Assassin. It's very permissive about what it does with the results of Spam Assassin at that point. It leaves most of the discard for Spam Assassin to happen later, but if it's very clearly spam, it will get killed at that spot. Postfix then runs it through
all mail going to the IETF.org MX, right?
This is all mail going to at IETF.org or any at our IRTF.org. Anything that would land on IETF-A. We lost Glenn, and he probably was wanting to say something and fell off. So we'll wait for him to come back. There he is. So for those of you that have just joined, please go ahead and share video if you can. We're trying to replicate the experience that we would get from a conversation around a table. So again, this is all mail coming in to IETF-A, goes through virus scanner, gets marked by Spam Assassin, then goes through a set of routing based on aliases. It looks at these aliases. One of the first set of aliases causes it to go through post-confirm. Post-confirm is a program that looks to see if this sender has been confirmed as a sender that the mail should be allowed to go through the IETF-A processing chain. If they don't find this person in the yes, this person's been confirmed list. They get a message sent to them. The mail they sent goes into quarantine. When they reply to that message, there's a key in the message that causes the receiving thing to say, okay, I can release this queued message and put this address into the approved senders list. And as you'll see later in the document, there's a description about how the approved senders list is pre-populated with all the subscribers to the IETF list and several other feeds. It's at this point that if the message came in to at dmarc.ietf.org, that it is unwrapped and sent out to the address that we're routing around Dmarc for. Once it gets through this, mail will land on one of several destinations. As you go across the top of the page here, things might get sent to the data tracker. We have several data tracker ingestion points. These are Python management commands, Django management commands that accept the mail as a blob and cause records to be written into the data tracker. The big feeds here are nomcom feedback, some IANA review mail, and there is an ingester for conversations about IPR disclosures when the Secretariat sends a message to someone through the data tracker. There's a reply to that has a key in the reply to. Messages coming back to that reply to will have their body scraped and be added to the history of the IPR disclosure. That particular endpoint gets a lot of spam. The spam is getting dropped on the floor mostly. We've got some work that we're going to do to clean up the way that particular what happens when spam arrives at that spot. There are a few shell accounts that will get mail directly delivered to them. This is how mail is going through to RT. There are places where we have explicitly defined external, like off-system places that the mail should go. They get routed to that spot. If they get routed to, again, I guess this is where the things that are unwrapped by Dmarc would go to that destination external and be delivered, off machine. If the destination is a list, we go into the second page of that processing. On that list, we go through adding the post-confirm challenge, adding the archive.dat header, then dropping it in Mailman. Mailman does its normal checking. Mailman can be configured to remove any DKIM headers that came in on the message, and our instance is. Then we have extra code that we have added that on outbound processing will put in a new DKIM signature. Once things are delivered to the participants, there's a chain that takes this thing to the archives. There's an ingestion script, and you can follow what happens in the flow to the right to see what happens at that point. So that is the high-level overview. If anybody is particularly curious about any of that, you can feel free to ask questions now. You can also refer back to this graphic as we're talking through some of the things that we're going to be talking about further down. So again, I would encourage anyone who's joined to go ahead and share videos so that we have
apparently we're at 9 is the max
experience. Go ahead,
apparently
Michael.
9 video apparently is the max.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, apparently that's what Alexei experienced. My question was about the post confirm. I was reading the Mailman upgrade, and I guess that's the major piece, the major bit that is different between 2 and 3. And so I'm wondering, to what extent is our post confirm wildly different than what was there? How much uplift do we have to do of our
post confirm is our own code, even in what we're running right now. And when we
Really?
move to Mailman, we're going to have to rewrite it essentially, because right now it works by Mailman 2's extension interfaces, one of which is you just wrap the command line called Mailman, the command line command called Mailman to get into Mailman. There are a few other command line places where Mailman expects to be able to get list manipulation through that are vastly different in Mailman 3. So we will have to rewrite both how to get to post-confirm and what post-confirm does down inside to work with Mailman 3. Now, it's one of the smaller differences, but it's a big one, and it's one we're going to have to do. It is in addition, all of that code is going to have to be, any of the parts that we reuse is going to be rewritten in Python 3. It's currently a Python 2 program. So the bigger difference, hi Alexi, we see you now. The max of 9 is kind of surprising. I thought we worked out something different with Metaco, but we'll get along that path later. The bigger thing is going to Mailman 3, they refactored the way their application works completely. There's it's been separated between the core thing that does list the mechanics of sending messages through the list, right, and delivering them to an archive service, and the UI and the Python interfaces into isolated implementations in different projects, right? And all of the places where we have scripts that have been using Mailman will have to be adapted to use those new interfaces, the new command line interfaces, and most of them will be rewritten to use the new Python library interfaces. They completely replaced the UI, the thing that you're used to for going to sign up to the list or to do list moderation or any of this other, with this, if you scroll down into the bottom of it, there's a link to several places where there is a, see if I can remember the names. Yeah, so Postorius. We will probably end up using pieces of Postorius for doing things like allowing chairs to moderate held messages, unless we want to rewrite those. But we have a proposal from Jay to essentially replace most of what people would have used Postorius for, what they're using the Mailman 2 web interface now, with interfaces in the data tracker to make manipulation much easier. And this is the sketch that you see on this page under the improved user list management experience, where in this vision, you would go to the data tracker and the data tracker would tell you what list you were subscribed to, would offer you easier ways to subscribe to any other lists that the data tracker knew about, and to more easily see and affect global settings. So Jay, is there anything in particular that you would like to call out as something that is perhaps subtle or really important in this sketch that we could get a conversation on and feedback?
Well, no, well, maybe I just had a question from the processing bit beforehand. Just
Yeah.
At what point is the archive URL decided? Is that when it's delivered to the archives, or is there some already pre-calculated?
It is pre-computed.
So it's is it included in a header in the mail message or anything at all, or available in the
Yes.
message when the message is delivered? Yeah.
It is added to the mail before it goes into Mailman. If it knows that it's going to a list, the archived at header is added to the message, so that it's present
Right.
as it's going through the Mailman processing, and it ends
Oh,
up
I
as a
see now,
header
yeah.
in the archive. So any message that has been sent to you through Mailman, if you do a view source and hit Control U, there is an archived at header that has the link to where that message is archived.
Robert, is
Okay.
that still added by post confirm?
Yeah, I can see that now in there.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So we could, if we wanted to, make that an explicit URL at the bottom of the message as well as part of the footers, if we wanted to.
In the footer.
Yeah, if we wanted to. Okay, I just thought. So look, on the UX stuff that I've done here on improve user list management experience. This is basically bringing together everything that I have heard people talk about the list management. So we have multiple different ways that people subscribe at the top. I know this from doing the all of IETF survey and receiving the complaints from people who subscribe using their own domain name and multiple different email addresses within that domain name. And so that's why we have the private domains bit there, as well as the people who just have multiple different addresses subscribed and who use different addresses for different mechanisms. So that's why there. The pause mail delivery tool addresses, I think Murray asked for that, or someone asked for that, which is why that's there. So you might want someone else to explain that, because I don't fully understand it, but it's there. The subscriptions, as you can see, we've got two at the very top, which are like special ones, the important news one and the direct survey one. Then the rest all follow a pretty straightforward mechanism where we've got them in categories, and you can subscribe for everything in the category or not, and you can change your address and, you know, a variety of bits and pieces like that. The other thing that I've been trying to do here is help people understand the difference between a highly used important list and a never used in 15 years but everyone's too scared to close it list. And which to me is a failure of nerve, but never mind. And so that's why we have the volume listed there. So that, which is the best indicator I could think of for giving people an idea of what it is. I mean, and that may be too complicated. It may just be easier just to have like a red, yellow, green indicator or something for the how much the list is used. But something there anyway to give people an idea of the volume of the list. And also, some people may not want to sign up to a very high volume list, or they may choose different mail filtering as they've got at their end as a result of that. So that's basically it, I think, for that.
So when you called out the pause mail delivery to all addresses, I heard you say that Murray suggested that, or did I mishear?
No, I think it was Murray, yes.
Murray,
right,
you're here on the call.
I'm sorry, I was distracted by something else. Can you repeat what I suggested? I'm sorry, I'm trying to stir a memory here.
Yeah, so if you look at near the top of the improved user list management experience graphic, under the first section of email addresses, there is a line that says pause mail delivery to all addresses. And this is something that Jay feels like you may have asked him for. Does this ring a bell at all?
No, not me. Why would I have said that? Let me think.
I'll work out who it was and we'll find out.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I can come up with some reasons why I might have thought that, but I don't remember saying it. I don't remember this conversation. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't think that we will have in Mailman or even in Mailman 3 the ability to cause Mailman to essentially queue delivery, to say stop and hold mail until I release the floodgates and then cause many months of mail to fall out later. I think that if we implement this at all, it will have to be a don't deliver directly to me.
No,
Right.
sorry, my mistake. It was Eric Klein that suggested
Good. I
it.
thought I was going crazy.
This is John. I would find that for 2 reasons. One is sometimes I just go away for a week and I would prefer to pick stuff up from the archive. And the other is that I don't actually, I pick up all my mail from the IMAP server. So I subscribe so I can send mail to lists, but in fact I have other ways to receive it. So I would really prefer that it not send the mail to me as mail. And I'm a little unusual, but I don't think I'm all that unusual.
Yeah,
It's becoming far more normal.
Yeah, I can't think of a good reason why I would want to do it this way. It puts a burden on the servers, and I don't imagine, I can't think of a list package that has ever been able to say, go back from date X to date Y and resend everything I should have gotten to me now.
Yeah.
For one thing, it causes, I mean, unless you do some funky things, it makes threading difficult. There's a lot of reasons why that would be a difficult thing to get totally right. So I wouldn't make that a priority.
Yep. It basically, I think that if we implemented it, would be the equivalent of setting the receive bit to no for all of the addresses, all of the mail lists that they were subscribed to until they flipped it back.
Right. But it's the retroactive part that would.
Yeah, no retroactive sending.
Yeah.
I think we've got agreement on that. Okay. So we're running kind of close to my original proposed schedule, a little bit behind. We've got this pending desire or pressure to move to Mailman 3. I've captured some of the reasons why we've would want to do it in the list. I'm sure that there are many more. But the biggest, in my mind, is that Mailman 2 is officially no longer maintained for anything except critical bug fixes. And there will come a point in time where the Python 2 will stop even getting maintenance. And the packaging for that on a lot of systems is already falling off what comes stock. You have to go do special things to get the packages to get Mailman 2 installed. So there are a lot of things like what's suggested in the graphic that Jay provided, the mock-up that Jay provided, that will be a lot easier to do with the Python libraries that Mailman 3 exposes compared to what we would be able to do inside Mailman 2, where we would essentially be dancing with the shell command line interfaces to manipulate lists. And perhaps it moves us closer to IDN, EAI support, but we'll talk about that in a minute. It may be that that's still a little bit out of reach. Because I've already called out that, post-confirm is running under Python 2. It's something we'll have to move to Python 3 when we make this migration. Python 3 is fundamentally a slightly different beast. As I called out before, it's split into these different modules. If you follow the links to the official documentations, you can see the descriptions of the core module, Postorius, the Mailman client. Postorius itself, interestingly, is written in Django, and there is a Django Mailman 3 interface that it uses, which we might adapt We might choose to extend post stories to do these kinds of things, that to make it aware of what's happening in the data tracker, or write a parallel interface that allows the integrated manipulation that it's talking about. They've moved archiving off to sit on top of HyperKitty. It's something that I don't think we'll use. We've already got our archiving figured out. So do we have anybody on the call that has had firsthand experience with moving a large number of lists from Mailman 2 to Mailman 3, and in particular a large subscriber body from Mailman 2 to Mailman 3? So John, I think you had some opinions about this in the past, that you had heard some experience, at least secondhand.
I don't think it was me. I don't use Mailman at all on my lists.
Okay. Yeah. So I had probed the community a couple of years ago for basically experience reports, and got a lot of please don't do this, it hurts so much, the pain kind of response. I suspect that would be different now. Do you think it's worth sending another message out to chairs or to IETF General to try to get at least reports of dragons back from people who may have wrestled with this in other environments? Or do we just take it as
sending the email, Robert? But I guess we have to do this migration given the state of Mailman 2 and Python 2, right? It's really not an option to not do anything anymore.
I would ask for objections as opposed to letting people just vent.
Okay.
What are we going to do with those objections, though? I mean, are we going to stick on Mailman 2 and Python 2? It's like, I was specifically asked if everybody has experience with the transition that can help us.
Yeah,
and if you get objections, you get them, but it's not really like something.
We did a massive migration from Python 2 to 3 recently. I can try to see if we have any documentation about what made that sort of thing easier or smoother, or a summary of what we had to do, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, perhaps. I think we've got a good handle on Python migration. It's the actual Mailman app migration that's the place. I think that we.
Well, I mean, obviously, we don't make any real use of Mailman, so I can't help there. But if there's Python stuff, then I can probably find some supporting help there.
Cool.
Robert, I think the critical question that the IETF will want to know is exactly how are we going to make the transition. I think that's actually probably the harder question than the actual, objections or whatever. And to that extent, that the question might be more along the lines one way is to move some lists from the old system to the new system through some system of forwarding, right? And so the question might actually be, are there volunteers rather than are there objections?
So Glenn, do you think it's possible to run Mailman 2 and Mailman 3 in parallel with all
not on the same machine?
IETF.org on the same machine?
I wouldn't run it on the same machine.
I'm sorry, but I'm gonna jump in here. I put my hand up, and I apologize to everyone for this. But at Jay's direction, on the Sandbox server, we set up Mailman 3. And Mailman 3 is now running on the Sandbox server in its native form. And we are also running Mailman 2 on the Sandbox server. And what we found, at least with the current releases, is that it's relatively simple to move a list from Mailman 2 to Mailman 3. It can be done on the server. And so you can have, in essence, lists using Mailman 2 and different lists using Mailman 3. And we found that we can take a list and just switch it over. It's a manual process, but not arduous, from Mailman 2 to Mailman 3 and have everything just work. Now, that does not speak to post confirm, mail archive, data tracker, anything else. That's just a test setup that we did at Jay's direction and just completed last week. So apologies to all, but I just wanted to jump in and say that.
Well, jumping in is what we should be doing on the call. Don't anyone hesitate to jump in when you got something to say. So that is news that I didn't expect, and I'm glad to hear it, that we could take this incrementally as we go through the lists. And it sounds like maybe we could get a test list set up and start working on making sure that we have functional integration from Mailman 3 with post-confirm and feeding things into the archive before we start moving real traffic into it. So that is the path that I would recommend. So Postorius is running on sandbox.ietf.org. And is it easy to find how to get to that interface, Glenn?
Yeah, I can send you the information after we do this meeting if you like. Maddie did the bulk of the work. We just completed it a few days ago. I haven't had much time to play with it myself, but I'll send. And again, you know, all respect to Michael, we've only done testing. We don't know how it's going to work in production. So, you know, on large scale, we could run into things. We're just at the beginning stages, but I'll send you that info, Robert, offline once we're done.
I didn't imagine it was possible to run them on the same machine. I was imagining that you're going to wind up with another VM, and that there would be essentially a gradual but effectively a forklift upgrade through, you know, use of SMTP between the machines. But what you're telling me is it sounds much simpler than I had imagined. So that's probably good news.
Yeah, we could certainly, Michael, we could certainly do that. And, you know, I'm no opposition for me. Like I always say, I'm just the operator. I do what they tell me. But we did want to see if it could be done on the same machine to make the lift and shift easier. And we did run into some kinks with, you know, making it work with the data tracker because of the Django interface and blah, blah, blah. But to her great credit, Maddie got all that sorted out. And so, yes, Robert, it is running. We've got the HyperKitty, which we know we will want to replace with Ryan's much superior mail archive software. And we've got the Postorius and we've got the engine all running, and we've sent messages to lists, and it's all been cool and groovy at this point.
All right. Well, when you get that information put together for me, I will send a summary to the tools discuss list so we can get some extra eyes poking at it. Okay, so unless somebody else has something that they know of to bring out about the challenges that we're going to run into moving to Mailman 3, I think I'd like to move ahead into some of the rest of the call, and we'll be a little bit ahead of our schedule. So listening for a few seconds to see if somebody has anything else Mailman 3 specific they want to dive into now. So I have an agenda bash from Murray. If you'd like this.
Plus one, the thing that Michael said earlier, that I think when we go to the IETF community, they will want to hear about the plan at some level of detail. So I think we should probably have something written up that says, here's roughly how we're gonna, you know, do this migration and how we're gonna,
yeah,
you know, do these things. I think that was a good point.
Agreed. So I got a quick agenda bash from Murray because he's going to have to drop off the call. Let's fast forward to the Dmarc Rewriting section of the agenda. So as you noted in the flow diagram at the very top of the graph, there's a spot where when email comes in, the processing chain looks to see if the mail was to @dmarc.ietf.org, and if so, if the username part was formatted in a way that was expected. And if it is unwritten to go back to whatever was in that username part. So as in the example here, it would be user@dom.aim, and mail would just get sent directly to that user. There is some cultural memory that this rewriting would be dependent upon having mail go through in the other direction first, and that a database was kept about addresses that were safe to, were okay to unwrap. I've looked at the code. There is no such thing. It will unwrap any address that's sent to @dmarc.ietf.org as long as the sender that is sending to that address passes through post confirm. So it does provide a mechanism where somebody might choose to attempt to circumvent a block by having their mail wrapped through Dmarc or whatever, but it would be someone that is on our post confirm approved list already. And if changes, if complaints come in, if we start to see abuse, it's easy to remove the abuser from the post confirm allow list. Now, as we're processing mail and we're about to send it to someone, and it turns out that the Dmarc policies for sending, John, I'll get my to's and froms wrong here. Yeah, the Dmarc policy.
I can finish this sentence for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. If the sender has a restrictive Dmarc policy, then we rewrite it so the from address is in our domain and it passes Dmarc since it'll pass our Dmarc policy. And at that point, we also set up some sort of temporary forward. So if somebody then replies to that rewritten address, it will work.
It's not a temporary forward. That's the rewriting. That's what I was talking about a moment ago. The other direction of writing just happens, period.
In two addresses or from addresses or both?
Two addresses, I believe.
Oh, that turns us into an open relay. We should fix that.
Well, it's only an open relay for people who are in post confirms allow list.
Yeah. Actually, that's basically the forward I was mentioning, just implemented in sort of a peculiar way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, this is adapted from something I did on my system where I actually do explicit forwards, but the overall effect is the same. And if we're going to deal, given that Dmarc is not going away and that ARC, which is supposed to fix this problem, is being adopted very slowly, I don't think we have any alternative but to keep doing this.
Okay. So Murray, did you have anything that you want to add about the current state of ARC and when we might be thinking we should pay more attention to it?
I mean, you can try being part of the experiment. It was published as an experimental draft, and I think John's understanding of its deployment matches mine, that a few large operators have started doing it, but not enough to say that it's to be able to conclude whether the experiment was a success or not. This is something I've asked the working group since you published it as experimental. Who's running the experiment? Who's collecting data about its efficacy and whether it's should be folded into the standards track version of Dmarc or not. I saw your comment in the document about the software. I haven't touched it in a few years because, as far as I can tell, it's in a usable state. There are some pull requests that I have to go look at. If there's something broken in it or some feature you need that you don't have, I'm happy to go work on it for the IETF. There's 4 or 5 filters and there's only me really working on them. So my time is spread among a bunch of other things. But if something urgent needs attention, I'm happy to work on it with you. But yeah, I don't have anything dispositive to say about ARC yet. It's still early in its life, and I've asked the working group for status on it, and I haven't really received any. Like, a few people have said, yes, we're trying it. I haven't heard, yes, it's effective. Yes, we should do this. It's still too early for those conclusions, apparently.
So I think my recommendation would be that we wait for the community to say in large numbers, hey, why are you still doing this Dmarc thing? Why aren't you just using ARC? And at that point, start to look at whether and how we would implement.
I don't have any counter advice.
Yeah, I mean, that may happen someday, but no time soon.
Okay.
Just want to say in general that I don't think ARC will get legs unless the IETF is using it. So this is one place we to lead by example. I'm not speaking, I don't know what that means in the end, but that's how my feeling.
I mean, Google and Microsoft are doing it on outbound mail. So it's, there are big gorillas interested in it. I don't believe they are using it to validate inbound mail yet.
That would be great, because if they did, I can ask that team, are they doing it? Because if they were checking ARC inbound and they were able to, like, the size of the data that they see, they could definitely say, yes, this is effective. No, it's not. But I don't like John's observation suggests those data don't exist yet.
They may be collecting statistics. It couldn't hurt to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I can ask them. I don't know if Brandon is still the right person to talk to over there. It seems like he's gone quite silent lately.
He isn't, but he knows who is.
He knows who is. Okay. I'll go mute and I'll email him right now.
So let's jump back to the IDN EAI support. And John, I think you have the most informed opinion about what we can do at the moment. So
yeah, EAI is a swamp, and the problem with EAI is that it is only one way. If you have an ASCII address, you can write to an EAI user, but EAI users cannot write to non-EAI users. Where an EAI user is someone on a system that supports EAI, even if they don't have an EAI address. So in practice, this means that among mail systems we see, like Gmail and Hotmail, have full EAI support, even though they're all ASCII addresses. Anybody running XM or postfix, it's an option that they can turn on, although most people don't. And then there's a bunch of then there's a variety of systems in Asia. In reality, the people who use EAI are some non-English speaking communities. There's one in Thailand and there's one in India. So I think we should do it to eat our own dog food. But I don't think we should eat. I think we should not overestimate how useful it will be or underestimate how hard it will be, because of this one-way issue. I mean, so my advice is, since we're postfix underneath, we can turn it on and see how it works. And having tested it, I can tell you the postfix support works great. Okay, but then once it comes out of postfix, it has to go into some sort of IMAP server. And there are, as far as I can tell, there are no IMAP servers that actually have EAI support, although it turns out that sort of legacy postfix works pretty much okay usually, in some cases if you're running Dovecot, and then the mail program you're using, depending on what it is, like Thunderbird supports EAI, Outlook supports EAI, pretty much anything else that runs on your desktop other than, so Apple Mail supports it on your phone, but not on your Mac. I mean, so I think, it's worth turning it on for our own mail to do some experiments and see how it works. As far as adding EAI to Mailman, that is a huge project, because you have to come up with some way to do aliasing to send mail to non-EAI recipients, which means both you have to figure out who is a non-EAI recipient, and are you going to maintain the aliases, or you're going to ask people if they have aliases at home, which they might or might not do. And I don't think it's something we should do on our own. And just FYI, the people at ICANN who run mailing lists also think they're going to add EAI to Mailman. I'm pretty sure they have no idea how hard it is. And I noticed it's somewhere on the Mailman roadmap. So I think if we were going to do this, my advice would be to say it is a good idea, and then talk to the Mailman developers and see if we can come up with some people who understand EAI and actually have the skills to do it, because it's a big project. I don't think it's worth trying to do ourselves. And also, just practically speaking, anybody who's writing to an IETF mailing list will have a non-EAI address, because you can't get your work done otherwise. You know, they may have both. I have both, but you know, and people in China and in India have both. But it's not going to be it's not going to be a blocker for anybody's work for quite a while.
Anybody else have anything they want to add? I think the takeaway from this is that we try to work personal relationships and or just the submit a feature request interface with the Mailman developers and wait for Mailman to come say that we have the Mailman part of this figured out.
Yeah, but I think it's also worth doing just, I mean, for people who like people like Jay who actually have, you know, I don't want to turn Jay into my only guinea pig, but for people who have or Lars, anybody who has an IETF mailing address, if we just turn it on the underlying postfix and see how it works, I think that would be interesting.
You know, if we just turning it on the underlying postfix isn't likely to have unexpected side effects. Yeah,
and I mean,
that's the
like
question.
I say, the postfix code works fine, but the thing is, it ain't just postfix. There's you know, there's IMAP servers and POP servers and MUAs and filters and spam. Oh yeah, and it's Spam Assassin. It works. I tested Spam Assassin, no problem there. But I think you're going to find people's mail clients and just other software that hasn't occurred to us. Oh, like the mail archives. You know, like they don't handle EAI either, or maybe they do. I don't know.
It'll be interesting to see. Jay, did you have something that you wanted to say, or? Okay. So the video just rotated you in, so I was wondering.
I noticed there was an open slot, so I thought, you know, it's
Yeah,
good
thank
that
you.
can see me in the morning. It always refreshes
glad to
people
have you
apparently.
going.
So yeah.
All right, so I think we know what we're going to do with that. That those two things being putting pressure on the Mailman 3 development community, and we'll talk with Glenn about enabling the EAI in our basic postfix, and we've got some folks at staff.ietf.org addresses that can nudge it and see what really breaks.
Yeah. Also, it's worth making a note that ICANN thinks they want to do the Mailman work and they have money, so we might be able to get some help out of them.
All right. So we've got a next section talking about how we're dealing with spam, how we are keeping our lists from being as rendered as useless as most mailing lists in the world have been just by the rising spam tide. You can read through the mechanics that we have. Virus scanning and the use of Spam Assassin are pretty normal. As I mentioned earlier, where we have Spam Assassin early in the chain, it's fairly permissive, just labeling the message and allowing individual list managers to set their rules for dropping spam down inside Mailman's interface on working with what the spam score looks like. We've mentioned post confirm several times. This section provides a little bit more of a concise description of what post confirm does. It's turned out to be, in the past, very effective at deterring people that just had simple spam bots that would connect to SMTP, dump in some bits, and run away, because it required a round trip to the sender address before any mail would actually go through the list. Now, we have seen an increase in the number of addresses that are on our post-confirm allow list, probably because of the way we are managing the global whitelist for Mailman, that may be defeating that. I have not heard or seen myself a particular increase in the amount of spam that's getting through to the lists, or even just into moderation on the lists. Does anybody have a different experience? So it may be that the fact that we're getting these into the post confirm allow list isn't hurting us that much. Down inside Mailman, the mechanisms that we've got right now for dealing with spam are mostly working with that spam assassin score and using it to decide what to do with the message before it lands on the list. We do have the global whitelist. This is something that's recreated every day. And as I note, we should do the work when it comes time to rewrite it in Python 3 to call it an allow list instead of a whitelist. Lists can be configured to allow any sender that is on that list to pass. So John, you'd mentioned that you subscribe to lists so that you can send to them. You really shouldn't have to do that at this point, at least not more than once. You subscribe to a list and you should be able to get to all of the rest of them. The Secretariat has periodically gone through the configuration and either added the global whitelist variable to the accept these non-members or poked the list managers to suggest that they do. And I believe that almost all of our lists are configured to use the global whitelist at this point.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's just, when I switched over to using IMAP, I didn't really check to see whether unsubscribing was a problem. So,
and this use pattern of reading with IMAP is going to make some of the statistics that Jay occasionally asks to collect a little bit more difficult. Alexi's done a little bit of work. We haven't really tested the efficacy of it yet to give us an approximation to what lists people are subscribed to through IMAP, basically by looking for the set of lists that somebody's done a marked read on. But that I guess it's worth calling out at this point that our ability to see how many people have subscribed to what, given that we have a lot of people that are consuming these lists using IMAP, is going to go downwards. And that will have an effect on the utility also of the improved list management interface that we were discussing earlier in the call. So I can envision for myself that outside of private lists, that I could see a future where I am not using Mailman to subscribe to anything. I just make sure that I'm in the global whitelist somewhere and I consume everything through IMAP. So there's a description here of how addresses find their way into this global whitelist. Some of the important things are all of the active email addresses found in the data tracker get scooped into this list. Any address that's been manually added to accept these non-members gets scooped into it. And the list, except when there is manual intervention, just grows monotonically. Once an address is in the list, it stays in the list because the regeneration starts with the list as it is and adds things to it. Now, I've noticed just by inspecting what's happening that this list has got some things in it, and we have some coming mostly from data tracker accounts that have active email addresses that are starting to grow rapidly, and they're growing with addresses that don't look like they were really legitimate addresses. It's made up string of letters at gmail.com kind of addresses. And a lot of them, and a bit of an up curve recently, as I note right now that list's nearly got 100,000 addresses in it. and the active participant numbers that I think that we've got in the actual subscriptions. I don't remember the exact number, but I think that it's in the some number of tens of thousands where that number is less than 5. So there's some cleanup to be done. Anybody have anything that they want to ask about, suggest that we do differently for dealing with spam? All right, let's talk about a hard one for a moment. What can we do to help chairs or the whole list management in general deal with a disruptive participant, someone that needs moderation? The tools that we have right now are setting the moderated bit on the list so that their posts go into moderation and the list manager deals with letting those posts through or not. And the Secretariat can go through and globally set that bit for every list that someone's subscribed to if there's a need for moderation across the entire list. If things are really out of control, somebody can put the entire list into moderation and release things basically from a manual allow list. So there are imagined attacks. We have not had this happen, but there are imagined attacks where somebody that is persistent could just generate new addresses to send from at a rate faster than we could throw into moderation, for example. What can we do better? What can we ask Mailman 3 to do better?
Robert, do we have data on how much these existing tools have even been used? Because my gut feeling is it's not a problem that the moderation tools that we have aren't working or aren't enough. I think it's that the chairs feel uncomfortable actually using them. And maybe we need some tools that sort of can be used in, less, pronounced cases of harassment, or whatever you want to call it, abuse. But I don't know, right? It seems like that the tools seem pretty comprehensive to me, at least. I don't know if they're actually that useful to us, because typically it's not like somebody spamming the list from random addresses, right? It's typically a participant that we know is getting out of line again, and we got to do something about that, right? And I don't know if the tools really help here.
If I may, we at the Secretariat level take action almost never. I mean, I can't remember the last time I actually had to block an address on the server. I mean, I block addresses for egregious spam that the lists never see, but in terms of being asked by the IETF, I can't remember who was president then. So it's a almost never used scenario. The chairs do, as Lars correctly points out, have the ability to moderate on a list, and I've observed that he's right, that there seems to be a lot of politics rather than operational issues around the moderation of troubled people.
Yeah, well, by definition, troubled people, it's all politics. There's, it's there have been discussions in the past about things that are not necessarily moderating people that are being abusive because of harassment or whatever, but we have conversations that are going a little bit crazy, and it would be good to have at least some of the participants in those conversations slowed down. Do we want to pursue or ask Mailman 3 to pursue some notion of, you've already sent 5 messages to this list in the last hour, this message has been discarded, please wait 20 minutes and resubmit? rate limiting of some nature.
The ISG has actually discussed something similar. Not sort of that exact same model, but basically the idea was to sort of slow down the discussion that seems to snowball out of control in various ways. That might be something that's useful. Is this something that Mailman 3 would already allow in some form, or is this something we would need to build? We don't know.
I don't know that it's in Mailman 3, but if instead of us building it, I would suggest that it would be something that we would ask them to build.
Yeah, I think it could be useful. I mean, we discussed it at least once in the last year or this year, whether we want to actually sort of try and enforce this. But it's also not something that I see. There's only a few lists I think where this might be useful for. And it's
but we can
in some
never
sense,
really.
Yeah, and sometimes the list-wide moderation gives you a bigger hammer. But you can sort of, if the chairs are sort of standing by, right, they can basically do something similar with that hammer already, but basically just pacing out how they approve posts onto the list.
Anybody else have any input on?
My high-level thing is that I don't think we necessarily urgently need new tools here. I think we're sort of focusing at the moment on sort of educating the chairs a bit through the edu team and eModir. And I think that is probably where we should spend our efforts. Unless somebody has like a really great idea for a tool, I don't have one. I don't think we need
you're right, Lars, that chairs could put it in moderation and then could release the messages slowly. But that's a lot of work for the chairs, and there's also and particularly there's 16 hours when they're not working, when the messages don't go through. But worse is that the allegation then becomes that they're playing favorites, right? If it's in their choice. Whereas if it's just that the list, is you get to send one message an hour and that's it, and everything else you send just waits until the next hour, that's a really good policy that I would like. And I think it would deal with most of the runaway tit for tat threads, except that people are CCing themselves, each other, right? So I wish actually that didn't happen, but it's very hard for us to do anything about that.
Yeah, but I also agree that I think part of the reason why it's not the current tools are successful, as in not used much, is because chairs are really hesitant, speaking as one, to do it. It's going to stop in 2 days. Let's just let it go down. But if there was a way to put, I'd say, a list-wide quota in terms of, this list is not going to get more than 5 messages an hour, no matter what, and everybody else backs up, then you'll get the social pressure of, look, I'm at the top of John Levine's list to IETF I should stop posting. But I also agree I don't think it's a big deal yet. But I think a large reason for that is that it's a big, scary hammer to use, and working with chairs don't want that abuse.
In my experience, it only works with people who are inclined to be reasonable, and the people who are firing off angry responses to everybody are sure that every message they're sending is very, very important. And you're censoring them because you don't want to hear the important facts that they have. And at some point, you just need to be able to put the hammer down and saying, sorry, you're disruptive.
That's a really good point. Assume good intentions only go so far.
Anyone have any other ideas, things that we could explore, things that we could throw into chair training? Okay. We're now quite ahead of our schedule, which is good. I'll give us some opportunity at the end to dive into detail if people want. The next thing that we've got on the agenda is how the aliases are managed. The data tracker currently hourly builds a set of aliases based on roles and a set of alias based on documents. So for groups, we go for groups that are either active, proposed, or in the boss state. And for of type working group, research group, directorate, team, review, and program, you'll note that area group is missing from that. It's something that we should add. And we should review and see if other group types make sense to have these aliases built. We do this if the group has seen activity in the last 5 years. So they're in this state and there has been some touch in the data tracker to that group in the last 5 years. After that, we stop making those aliases. Similarly with the documents, if the document is active, if it's an active draft, we generate the draft alias and these variants, the chairs, AD, notify, shepherd, and all aliases. We only do this for documents that have seen activity in the last 2 years. Jay recently pointed out that we are not creating aliases for RFCs. And once an RFC has been an RFC for a couple of years and there's been no activity on the draft alias for that RFC goes away. And there are buttons on the data tracker that you can click that will send you to an alias that doesn't exist, and mail you send to it will just fail. So there are definite user experience issues that we need to address there, either not presenting the button, not presenting the address when we don't have it, or perhaps maintaining a list of, well, that for sure, for drafts that are just old, very stale drafts, we just quit providing here's the thing that would send to the authors by this thing. We could perhaps have that button just expand the authors out in that case. But we may also want to consider providing an alias list for RFCs that stays around indefinitely. And we've had suggestions for different kinds of document aliases and group aliases. The ability to reach the authors for all the documents for a given groups. And chairs have said, you know, I've got 15 active documents and I want to send a mail to all of the authors of those active documents right now because it's something that's pertinent group wide. A request to be able to reach all of the chairs for a given area directors group. So Barry Lieb in particular wanted to be able to write easily to the chairs of the group that he was directly responsible for without bothering the chairs of the groups of the other art AD at the time, which, you know, he wanted it, we could build it. I don't know how much use it would get to provide that kind of thing, but we certainly could build it. And the Secretariat has asked us for an alias to reach liaison managers for an SDO or for a working group.
What's the cost of not timing out these aliases? Because we have been bitten by, you know, stuff not working anymore and people being surprised by it. What if we like not time them out after a couple of years? Would it be a big problem, or could we start doing that?
So we have, and Glenn, this is likely, this is going to be a question for you in a minute. So we have nearly, I mean, what is the number of drafts that we currently have in the database? Let me ask that question right quick.
While you're thinking about that,
result, we'd have an alias for every RFC that was before it was a draft. So we would have at least 9,000 aliases, right?
Yeah, we'd have thousands.
Yeah, we would for the RFCs for sure.
So it sounds as if we need perhaps a different approach to this, where what you're seeing on that button is an email address, and mailman is delivering, or the mail processing system is delivering to a single email address, but we have a separate process that is then expanding that out to all of the different people. So we perhaps, for example, I don't know if this is possible, could have a separate set of lists, one-way lists or something like that, that are automatically created. So, you know, it's just for example, expander.ietf.org or something like that. And so that we don't have to worry continually about the number of aliases that are being created in the table there. We have a separate mechanism for handling that expansion.
So bringing up the idea of using a separate mechanism, Glenn, maybe this is something that you could help with. What if instead of running things through vtable to deliver to these addresses, we have a melter that knows how to ask the data tracker for what the addresses are? And the melter actually builds the, you know, replaces the recipients in real time.
It just depends on the volume as to whether something that's actively polling to create that each time is going to be a resource burden rather than doing static generation in some mechanism.
I am not sure that I should still answer after Jay's answer, but I will say that it seems to me that a melter lookup is transactional and would introduce some type of delay, whether detectable or not, I don't know. But I do find that Postfix has been very efficient at dealing with its, you know, with its tables. They've just, when we do our next upgrade, there's a new database format, LMDB, that they've introduced, and I would be comfortable at least trying to let the data tracker build out a much larger alias table and let Postfix just use that and see how that runs. I think that operationally that would probably be smoother, but that's just my opinion.
Would you, if it had on the order of 50,000 things in it, do you think we would run into trouble?
I have no data for that, but my gut tells me that it would be fine.
I would be pretty surprised if it caused any trouble. I mean, Vitsa has, he knows his data structures.
Okay.
Yeah, Postfix very efficient with the mapping and the databases. I agree with John completely. I think it'd be fine. It's at least worth trying.
Actually, ask Victor Duchovny is one of the authors of Postfix. You can just ask him; he'll probably say it's fine.
Are you volunteering to ask him, John? As you're on mute, I think that counts as yes.
All right. Well, I will take an action early next year, depending on, unless we get an answer back from John's investigation that says, whoa, that we will just try this and see what kind of trouble we run into. All right, so one of the big problems that we haven't solved yet, and it would be very good to solve, is none of these aliases get the Dmarc treatment that messages going through lists get. So if this list expands to, you know, someone is sending to this list, and the list gets expanded, and they've got a Dmarc policy that is of the nature that John described, their address doesn't get rewritten on the way out. And this is causing failure, you know, as mail is not being delivered to the intended recipients because of the sender's Dmarc policy, to the point that I have noticed chairs, explicitly telling people not to use the @IETF.org aliases because, you know, mail's not getting to the recipients that they want to get to. So what would we need to do to provide this Dmarc wrapping for these aliases?
question.
Yep.
My limited knowledge tells me that the aliases themselves are being serviced by post-confirm, at least on the inbound side, and the Dmarc rewriting is being served by post-confirm on the outbound side. So I wonder if we could do something similar and just regenerate the alias tables in such a way that they deliver their outbound destinations back through post-confirm's Dmarc rewrite function. I mean, could it be as simple as just changing the way we do aliases?
So I think that I don't know if it would require the insides of the aliases to change. We don't want the outside of the alias to change for sure, right? The alias that somebody would actually type in their to header would need to stay the same. But the vtable aliases that we generate could possibly change, and those could cause things to get fed to different processing chains inside postfix. That could be a path. It sounds like either way we have to get post-confirm in front of in the path for sending to these things. So not just in the injection part, but in the outgoing part. Sorry, Glenn.
I'm sorry, I was just agreeing with you. We could probably experiment with that pretty quickly offline, Robert, you and I, at some point.
Okay.
And solve that. I feel like that should not be difficult, given that we already have post-confirm, which does a great job of rewriting and doing all that.
So are there any of these alias lists, types of aliases that we're not generating now that we should be? Does anybody have any questions about how we're building them? And other than the experiment that the plan that we are working towards now to just generate them for all drafts and I'm assuming all groups then at this point, since there should be symmetry. Are there any questions about how they're being generated? Has anybody experienced any problem with the frequency of generation? The fact that, somebody changes the chairs for a group, these aliases don't change until the top of the next hour. So potentially an hour, at most an hour lag. Has that been problematic?
I had that when I changed gen dispatch chairs, but so it's fine if the data tracker would remind one that when you change chairs, that put an alert up that says don't expect this alias to work yet. It completely slipped my mind that there was a delay.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are an hour and a half into our 3 hours. This gets us through the bulk of what I wanted to talk about. Given that we've got extra time, if there's any topic that people want to go back and dive into a little bit more deeply, this would be a good, we could do so. Just let us know what you'd like to talk about. The resources section, everything that is in the document below this is just information that I had intended for people to be able to read and reference later. I don't think we really need to dive into them in real time on the call.
So where did we get with the 98,000 whatever people that you think are on the whitelist that are clearly not participants?
Now that 98,000 number is the total,
Of the total.
the total size of the list, but I think that roughly half of it is probably garbage. So far, we haven't gotten past, well, there's something that we should look at some time in the future. So it would be possible to make some sort of assessment over the viability of those lists, to just run through again and see if the address has any real activity associated with it other than just the creation of a data tracker account. If it's only there because a data tracker account's been created, and that, especially if that account is over, a few days old, and there's been no drafts, no email traffic, etc., that we could pull a large number of those out based on that metric. Is it worth doing? We're accruing this big thing, and it allows, I could envision in a world where we had somebody that really wanted to be unfriendly to us, that they spend quite some time slowly dribbling up a bunch of these accounts and getting them on the whitelist, and then launching a large spam attack with a lot of these addresses. So, but this is the imagining of a level of malice in the world that has not been directed at us historically.
Well, it could even be happening accidentally. So are we making it too easy for people to confirm their address inside the post confirm response? Is a bot just auto clicking the response email there, for example, the response URL, the confirmation URL? Sorry,
I don't think they're coming in through explicit post confirm actions. We're getting some less than 50 per month of these things over the last several months being added that way. And I guess that would add up over time. But I think that more of these are coming in through people just creating data tracker accounts, since that gets you put into the whitelist.
Oh, so when you create a data tracker account, you don't have to confirm your email address?
There is one path through creating a data tracker account where you don't have to confirm your address, but I don't think that most of them are coming through that. I mean, I guess what I'm hearing from this is that we need to go get some metrics on where growth is coming from, and make sure that we're looking at the right growth path.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds also as if we might have a hole where people can exploit to create an account without verifying an email address.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe they are verifying it, but it's, again, as you said, too easy, bot clicking. We do have the competing pressures to balance because we're using data tracker accounts as our OIDC, is basically our ways to get into meetings. There's pressure to keep the bar to getting a data tracker account low. But I know when real people still have walked up to get data tracker accounts, they still run into the email message, the step that says you need to send email to the secretariat and get them to change some bits so that you can finish your account creation. So it can't be too easy. Karsten, it looks like you put yourself in the queue.
Yes, I just wanted to bring up bounce processing for a second. That's probably a non-issue for most people here because they are not trying to hurt cats. They are not working group chairs. When you have a large working group, then you have a large number of people whose companies, mail admins do weird things to their mail addresses. So you suddenly have these occurrences of people falling off their mailing list, and you think you have consensus on something, but the whole company hasn't gotten the consensus call and things like that. So chairs tend to switch on the noisy parts of the bounce processing that Mailman provides, which is great because many of those situations are then becoming visible very quickly. So unless the mail admin does something that completely swallows those mails, you find out that you have a problem. But that, of course, opens the next problem, that the bounce processing is a magnet for spam. And that's the only spam I ever get on IETF, through IETF accounts. And fortunately, I'm not a chair anymore, so I don't have that problem anymore. But I can imagine that other chairs still have it. And I'm wondering whether anything can be done with making bounce processing a bit more useful for chairs trying to hurt cats. Maybe I'm the only one who ever has that problem, but I should.
No, I understand the problem that you're describing, but I'm not immediately imagining what improvements to the bounce processing would look like.
It would
Yeah,
probably
probably-
look like. Go ahead, Carson.
Probably just setting up a higher spam threshold or a lower spam threshold, however you count it, before actually forwarding bounces to a chair. That would probably solve 80% of the problem. I mean, these real world bounces rarely look like spam. But the dash bounce addresses have gone into the spammers list. So spammers send to dash bounce regularly. We could also rotate through different dash bounce addresses on a monthly basis or something like that.
Glenn, you started to suggest something.
No, I was just going to say that the problem which Carson reports is a problem that comes to the Secretariat periodically, 2-3 times a year. And unfortunately, the suggestion that Carsten has offered, which is a good one, is not one that we have a knob to turn for. I can adjust the spam processing server-wide, and I can adjust the spam processing per list. But those bounce addresses are, by design, by mailman design, supposed to receive everything, and they do. Anything that, so what I was going to say was simply that what it would look like, fixing this problem, what it would look like is a code change to Mailman. And at this point, since we're going to go to Mailman 3, we should probably look at talking to them about this problem as well, because I can't believe that the IETF is the only one experiencing spam to the bounce addresses. For those of you who are not familiar, each mailman list has a number of aliases associated with it. There's the list name at IETF.org to which people send mail. But there's also list name -bounces at IETF.org, which receives, it's the envelope for outgoing mail, and it receives bounce reports and mailman failures, delivery failures, and so forth from the outside world. If we were to block those addresses, then we wouldn't know about bounces. We would keep sending blindly forever, so we can't do that. But we don't have a knob to do things like set the spam just for those addresses, or moderate just those addresses, or even rotate those addresses. That would all those things are in theory possible, but they would have to be done by changing Mailman's code.
Yeah, it'd be a change to Mailman, and I think that it might be a reasonable thing to ask Mailman to add a rule to apply a spam score filter to before delivering the bounces to the people that would receive the bounce messages. I think that that could be tuned to the point where the false positives would not be harmful. That's just something we should look out for the ability to do once we get to Mailman 3.
Okay, thank you.
I guess the other thing we might consider, Glenn, is watching the logs, because I think that'd be the easiest thing to instrument for rate of bounce messages from domains, and set alarms when we start to see large number of bounces from a domain to recognize that something is happening with an Ericsson or a Cisco or a whatever.
If I'm understanding this correctly, I think we have two issues. One is we don't want companies to get thrown off mailing lists for whatever reason. And that issue, we actually do have knobs. The Mailman list owners can adjust the threshold scores. I mean, we could do a global adjust too, but the point is that the list owners can adjust that behavior. If there's a list that has a problem, with Ericsson, for example, that's the one that comes to mind that I've dealt with recently, that is getting thrown off of lists because of bounces for whatever reason, that the list owners can adjust the bounce thresholds of accounts and even disable automatic bounce removal for their list if they want to, so that they can protect their participants. That is a choice. I don't know off the top of my head what the ramifications of that would be, but that seems to be the best choice. The other issue is list owners getting spammed through the dash bounces vector, and for that one, I think we do have to go to the Mailman 3 people once we've switched over to. I mean, it's pointless to go to the Mailman 2 people now, right? So I think we should switch over and then address it with Mailman 3. But I think that's going to be.
Well, so I think you missed the point on what I was trying to suggest. When you've dealt with when you have dealt with, or you've helped chairs deal with an organization that suddenly organization-wide is having problems receiving list mail, has part of that been interacting with the IT department at that company?
I have never found a way to interact with the IT department at a company. I get complaints from participants, and as a matter of procedure for me, I always send the log snippets to the participant, and I say, I am happy to work with your IT people and your mail administrators. And invariably, I can think of no exception to this, the answer I get back is, in essence, they are not available to talk to you or to me, meaning they are not available to talk to Glenn or to the reporting participant, but I've asked them to fix it and they'll look at it. And then I never hear anything else after that. I'm happy to work with IT people, but they have never made themselves available.
Very many large companies have barely outsourced their mail, right, to one of the hyperscalers. And we don't have mail people anymore, right? We use Exchange, and so whatever Microsoft lets to do, and there might be somebody who holds the contract, but that's not a technical person. And so you can
interestingly, we've never had a problem with Exchange people. Like, I know a lot of our participants use Microsoft. I, for my personal email, use Microsoft E5, and I love it. And we've never had a problem with Exchange, or ironically with Google. It's always the companies that run in-house. Anyways, rambling. As for logging, Robert, yeah, I think that's great. Maybe we can look at something in your Grafana instance or something like that. But I'm not objecting to any type of monitoring or alarms, but the bottom line is, let's say we found a problem, with a company, what would we do?
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
we got nothing.
All right. Well, unless somebody has something else that they would like to dive into, I think we give everybody an hour and a half back. And I know how I can tune for the next version of one of these. We are intending to have a series of these on different topics going forward. Having sat through this one, what would you like to see done differently in the future? Will you attend?
Yeah. While people are thinking about that, Robert, can we also talk about what plans we've got for topics as well, just to remind people, just to see if anyone's got any other ideas, maybe?
Yeah, let me find that.
And I'm underwhelmed by the feedback on the improved user list management experience interface that I produced there. I'm going to presume from that's excellent, and we should just go ahead with that, which is highly unlikely. So if anybody has any other things, please let me know off list or whenever about stuff that they'd like done there.
Yeah, I think we have experienced this in a number of other places as well, where people only actually look at these things once they are forced to use them. Yeah, that may be an unpleasant observation, but that may shape the way we handle this.
Yeah.
So our future workshops, one of the big ones is to explore more deeply this notion that we have been referring to as doc.ietf.org. You know, basically, what are our URL constructs across all of our sites? Do we have things we are exposing drafts or Rfcs or other artifacts in multiple places that we should be trying to concentrate into one canonical place? How much work do we need to put on top of these things for improving the SEOs and just community expectations, right? So that one would probably also talk about what our long-lived URLs should look like, building things that communities that aren't us can expect to use and expect to work over long periods of time. As we're finishing the tools.ietf.org transition, I'm sure many of you saw that we had some interaction with the sorry, name fail. This happens to me occasionally. Stack Exchange, right? The administrative side of Stack Exchange, where the people that were running Stack Exchange actually decided to go through and fix up links that had been pointing to tools.ietf.org and all of their messages, like historically, to point to somewhere that would still work going forward. So being able to provide organizations like that links is part of the discussion we would have at that workshop. I'm expecting to have one or more workshops that are focusing on big data tracker refactoring choices, right? So one of the ones that's coming up is whether or not we should track affiliation differently than we're tracking affiliation, where we're keeping affiliation in the data tracker, and how we try to keep history and how much we try to keep it fresh. Whether or not, and I think we will, but maybe I will phrase this more as what are the consequences of modeling RFCs as a thing different than a draft. Right now, we model an RFC as just another pseudo version of a draft, and that causes all kinds of pain and unexpected behavior for users when they're trying to look at, for instance, the last version of a draft before it became an RFC. It's easy for code to do the wrong thing in that place. And I think that we are and should make a refactor where we have a different document object that is of type RFC for the RFCs and the appropriate related document objects that would associate an RFC with the draft that the RFC came from. So we should have one of these workshops discussing mail archive in particular, looking at archiving in general, possibly archiving things, making archive things like chat logs easier to find and possibly found through the same interface as you would find mail threads. This will become pertinent when we get Zulip running, and if we get adoption across the IETF of our Zulip instance. We'll also want to have some insight, the ability to search across that, integrated with searches across email lists. That workshop, or one close to it, should also focus on statistics. Like, out of our archives, what tooling do we need to get better statistical view into the archive? What are the number of posts to a list per day? What are the number of posts by this participant to various lists per day? And we'd like to have a workshop that would help us figure out what we really need for those interfaces. I will note that we have the beginnings of an API already implemented at Mail Archive that will answer that number of posts to a list over a given period of time. I'm expecting we'll finish the documentation of pretty soon and can get it out into people's hands. And John, it may be something that you might consider using for generating the message that you're sending out. You might be able to provide even richer historical detail than what you're currently doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently getting it from the IMAP archive, which is also pretty easy to do. So either way.
Mm-hmm. So that's what we had captured, Jay, in the I guess talking about data tracker refactoring. Some of the other things that we're looking at are changing the interfaces for building an interface to find a person, improving the interfaces for draft submission, making things like the agenda interface more mobile friendly, and doing things like starting to see if we can resolve this tension around having multiple forms of Markdown in the world. We have these notions of live documents or semi-live documents, authors' copies of documents. Do we want the data tracker to start being able to manage these things? Do we want the data tracker to manage live swarm editing things like we're doing in notes.ietf.org directly? I think this is a workshop in itself, just talking about those things. And we might have a workshop focusing on improving how we're modeling roles, so that we have better data-driven access control for somebody that becomes a foo for a bar working group or foo for a bar type group. On the kinds of access they get into the rest of our systems happens a little bit more automatically than it currently does. We should also, at some point, look at how to stimulate activity around doing mining history and backfilling what the data tracker is modeling in its history. You know, we've got a pretty good idea of who was a chair for the last 10 years. It's hard, as we mentioned at the IAB aid workshop last week, to find out when somebody stopped being a chair, even in that last 10-year period. You kind of have to infer that by the lack of an artifact instead of the existence of an artifact, which is fraught with peril. But once you get past 10 or 15 years ago, the quality of the historic data that the data tracker has captured becomes poor to abysmal when you're starting to look at back deep into the 90s. So Jay, that's what I had written down for the things we've identified so far.
No, that's good. So if anyone has any other suggestions, please let us know. I mean, the doc one, obviously, there have been a number of conversations with different people about Carsten, for example. We've spoken about that. Be useful to do that. The mail archive one should probably be seen as more, as you said, Robert, more about archiving other things and how we bring those together. So, for example, could we imagine going to the mail archive tool, being able to put in a date range and seeing email addresses, instant messages that came up as well, and any other actions that took place across a, you know, within, say, a particular working group or something, as a timeline, so that you can understand things, you know, better in that type of way. That sort of thing might be useful. And then we have the complications around GitHub and the use of issue trackers and those sorts of things, and how that then appears within our archiving and searching tools as a potentially overall thing. So yeah, any things or suggestions that people have here would be useful for us to understand that we can build into these workshops.
I think you just identified another workshop, Jay, accidentally, with the how we deal with better capturing and representing the use of GitHub for document development.
That's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks everyone again for spending the time. I hope you found this useful. If you did not find this useful, please let me know. Don't just be silent about it. And give some of your day back, and hopefully see you all online again very soon.
Thanks, Carl.
Okay.
Bye, guys.